J-Bank has had a relatively long history with the Wilson Center, jointly working on certain projects, and that relationship has mainly turned on our friendship with Nida Galajis, who was the primary, I understand, or seemingly to me, the main force behind today's event, and she worked on it together with Carl Alto, the managing director of J-Bank, and so I wanted to just recognize them at this point. J-Bank is going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary next year, and our organization unites the American Latvian, Estonian American, and Lithuanian American communities here in the United States. And all of our parent organizations have also been around for a little over 50 years. And our main focus has been, for the first, let's say, 30 to 40 years of our existence, was getting the Baltic countries out of the yoke of communism, of Soviet communism, and in the next 10 years it was to help ensure the security of the Baltic states by getting them entry into NATO. And so NATO has always been an issue of interest to J-Bank. Our speaker today is Ambassador Jānis Eikmanis, who is currently the ambassador to NATO from Latvia, and he's also, prior to that, was the ambassador to Greece from Latvia. And his biography appears in the material, so I won't go any further into that, and he'll also tell you a little bit about himself too. But Ambassador Eikmanis also has a history with J-Bank because he was here in the United States working in the Latvia's embassy in the United States here in Washington in the pivotal era of Baltic ascension to NATO. He was here approximately 2000 to 2002, and together with J-Bank, he participated in what we called the NATO Roadshow. Ambassador Eikmanis and Carl Alto and some others went on the road, and in that period, visiting 25 United States states and making over 30 presentations to build grassroots support for NATO enlargement to the Baltics. And so he's been on the front lines of the NATO enlargement effort. And so that is all I wanted to highlight for now, and we'll hear more from Mr. Eikmanis now.
Thanks very much, Jānis, for the invitation. I feel like I should move this thing slightly this way because otherwise I'm going to have a kink in my neck trying to turn to all you over to my left here. Well, first of all, I should say that I'm in a more difficult position than some of the other speakers since I'm representing a government as opposed to those who spoke how shall I say, from a different perspective. In that situation, I sort of like to make two comments. One is Chatham House rules, and the other thing is that this will be, how shall I say, more from my personal perspective rather than from a strictly Latvian government perspective. We'll see how that comes out. Well, it's certainly nice to be in Washington again. As Jānis said, I spent some time here a few years ago trying to help the Baltic states get into NATO. When I was thinking about coming to Washington, the image that sprang to mind, and you may be surprised, was not cherry blossoms that may still be blooming, but probably not, but a picture, more of a drawing of George Kennan sitting in a chair looking out at Washington and the world, which appeared on a series of lectures he gave at the NDU in the late 1940s. I'm a fan of Kennan not only for his elegant English, but for his sober analysis of the events of his time. One may not agree with everything he said, but you have to admire his thorough analysis and the way he said it. I accept his invitation to think hard about how we will manage the future. However, I will demur any favorable comparisons. The only thing that draws us two of us together is the fact that he spent a number of years in the late 1920s in Riga, Latvia, where I was born and where he cut his teeth trying to understand Russia, Soviet Russia. My route to Washington, however, was rather different from his. I started my journey from Latvia to Germany as a displaced person, then to Canada for the greater part of my life, then returned to Latvia in the early 90s, where I entered its foreign service, then a stint in Washington, and now permanent representative of Latvia to NATO. The only thing I can say is, what a ride. But I want to return to the sober analysis that Ken invites us to undertake when we look at the world. Pundits and analysis use words like uncertainty, turbulence, instability, fat tails, and black swans to describe what lies ahead of us in the future. Though I have to say that the pace of recent events seems to bring that future a lot closer. A sense of this is well captured in the report to NATO by 12 experts on the strategic concept. And as you know, the group was ably led by Secretary Albright, and to whom I want to express my personal thanks for efforts on behalf of all NATO nations. What struck me in her presentation to the North Atlantic Council was her characterization of the alliance's way ahead as one of complexity. I could not agree with her more. I would say that the scale of complexity has never been greater, not just for the alliance, but for all of us. One only has to have read the news of the financial crisis of the last 2 years to be convinced of that. It is often said that everything is connected to everything else, yet not always do we know exactly what it is that is connected to everything else, until it is too late. There are undoubtedly many reasons for why human beings cannot see connections readily, but I would contend that part of the problem may be they have spent the last 2 centuries encouraging and rewarding people with narrow specializations, except that now in a more complex world, we need to not only have specialists, but also an ability to see things more comprehensively, so that we do not get into situations where we cannot see the forest for the trees. Where are the integrators? Are we encouraging our institutions to think more comprehensively or holistically, so that we can better connect the dots and anticipate better, and in the process become more resilient? An overly specialized approach to problems usually means solving one problem at a time, when the problem may well be networked and requires a comprehensive approach. We have to create incentives that favor this more comprehensive approach, which will mean greater focus on preventive action, while at the same time we safeguard our hard power when it's really needed. It is in this context that I believe we should think about the future of NATO and the role of the strategic concept in guiding the alliance's further development. And hopefully by the time of the Lisbon summit, we will have this guiding light. While all allies seek to make their contributions to debate and press their concerns, it is undoubtedly true that much will depend on American leadership. The United States already is playing a key role on a variety of fronts, from the START II treaty to the CFE and missile defense. I think I can safely say that the alliance members welcome this leadership. And in fact, just recently, a colleague of mine said thank you to the United States for its renewed leadership of the alliance, a leadership that the U.S. Ambassador Ivo Dola remarked would revitalize the alliance. As we've heard this morning, a NATO agenda is full. Our first priority undoubtedly is Afghanistan, which needs to be stabilized so that the alliance can start transferring responsibility for conducting counterinsurgency operations to the Afghans themselves. Those who follow events in Afghanistan know that achieving this endgame will not be easy, given again the complexity of the situation. NATO has given support to General McChrystal's comprehensive approach to securing Helmand and Kandahar, but the comprehensive approach needs to go further with a civilian surge so that the Allies and the other international organizations can deal with reconstruction and development in a more comprehensive way. The lessons of Afghanistan are surely that the international community has to be prepared beforehand when it enters a situation like Afghanistan. There needs to be a better coordination of efforts of all the players, from the outset of this type of operation. Afghanistan is only one issue on the alliance's agenda. There's also Kosovo, Russia, Georgia, Ukraine, missile defense, tactical nuclear weapons, relations with partner countries, CFE, arms control, and I should not forget headquarters reform. Each one represents a separate challenge with no easy fixes. These issues are on the agenda today, but what about tomorrow's challenges? Challenges like cyber attacks, energy security, consequences of climate change, resource scarcities, and I could go on. As Secretary Albright remarked, this is complexity. The only way that I can make all these challenges seem simpler is to reduce them to a common denominator. Here I would agree with Secretary Gates, who in the latest edition of Foreign Affairs singles out failed or fragile states as the major challenge that we face in the future. I agree. But my argument is not that the challenge will be failed states as such, but that many of the emerging challenges are reducible to state fragility and even failure, more broadly. Seen from this slide, failing states may well include even the more developed countries as a result of the impact of the ongoing financial crisis. There may well be a temptation by some states to focus on short-term issues and neglect to think hard about the medium and long term. What is clear is that no one country will be able to manage this complexity alone. At some point, some of you may be thinking to yourselves, thank God for NATO. Certainly I am. With the report of Secretary Albright's band of experts, and she called them a band of experts, and the future work the Alliance will do in Brussels in preparation for the Lisbon Summit in November, I think we will take the measure of the challenges we face collectively. We often hear that what makes the European Union unique is the pooling of sovereignty. In NATO, we pool our defense capabilities, with Article 5 as the glue that keeps the allies together, with a strong transatlantic link as an essential element of this glue. We should not underestimate how important Article 5 is to the allies, to all allies. A sense of security and reassurance at home for our publics allows the alliance to think more comprehensively and more globally. How we communicate the continuing relevancy of the alliance will be a challenge for the alliance collectively, and it also will be a challenge for each nation to convince its public that the alliance is still relevant. I will not surprise you if I say that in the Baltic states there is little need for such convincing. Both show overwhelming support for NATO. It is clear that the scale of complexity and the challenges we face collectively requires that NATO be seized at what it can do to be ready for a variety of contingencies and be an effective guardian of our security. But what is clear is that we cannot do more Afghanistans anytime soon. Instead, as Secretary Gates points out, there is a need to shape the security environment so that those countries which do not have the capacity to deal with their security challenges gain that capacity, so that the international community does not have to come to their rescue. In this context, NATO's partner countries take on a new role. They are no longer peripheral, but essential. They are those countries with advanced capabilities who can provide additional heavy lifting when dealing with a crisis, as the case in Afghanistan. And there are those partner countries that need assistance in defense and security reform, so that they are ready to deal with their own domestic contingencies. We need to help failing states from spinning out of control. Preventive engagement will be an essential component of NATO's toolkit. I will repeat what has often been repeated countless times. NATO and the European Union need to cooperate and coordinate their responses to pending crises, and when they are not preventable. And at the same time, a closer collaboration with the UN and other international organizations will be necessary. But the toolkit will need to be augmented by a more streamlined decision-making process within NATO, with particular attention to early warning. There will be a need for better understanding of the impact of long-term events and their impact long-term events. And there is a need for a more active role for ACT. As you know, that's a component of NATO that is situated in Norfolk, Alliance Command Transformation, which has already produced an excellent scenario report, but which should have a greater involvement in the Alliance's consultation and dialogue, particularly when nations consult about Article 4 issues that we talked about earlier today. That may become an Article 5 crisis management issue. Needless to say, better intelligence sharing will be an essential ingredient in this process. And the creation of a new division in NATO that will deal with impending crisis will seek to gather all available information from all sources to ensure that the alliance is not caught off guard. In short, the alliance will have to become smarter, more agile, more comprehensive, and more strategic. But I cannot take this global view of what the future holds without at the same time returning to Europe. And you will not be surprised if the subject is Russia. I think you could expect as a representative of Latvia would find a few words to say about this, yet again, complicated subject. You will not be surprised to know that the NATO-Russia agenda is also full. From the Medvedev and Lavrov proposals to the question of continuing relevance of the CFE, missile defense, the issue of tactical nuclear weapons, and these are issues that are ahead of us. We also have ongoing agenda items from Afghanistan, piracy, terrorism, theater missile defense, not to mention Ukraine and Georgia. You can see from this list that most of the issues are hard issues. The question is, can we move this full agenda along? I dare say it's an open question. There's consensus among all 28 allies that the best way forward is to engage Russia on issues where real practical cooperation can be attained, where both sides have a mutual interest to cooperate, as in the case of Afghanistan and piracy, to take two examples. And here I can mention that Latvia is trying to assist by providing a transit route from Latvia through Russia to Afghanistan for items destined for ISAF. There is a general consensus that substance has to be the defining principle of our cooperation, with the alliance leaving the door open for further practical cooperation. But whether Russia will come in, it is not clear. One could argue that Russia is in a bit of a dilemma. If what is written in its defense strategy reflects its policy accurately, namely that it sees NATO as a danger, then one would expect that it would seek to diminish or eliminate that danger. But by cooperating with the alliance and doing more together, does not Russia strengthen the alliance? Russia will have to confront this choice, to fully engage NATO or to follow a dual-track approach of limited cooperation on the one hand and on the other seeking ways to weaken the alliance. How far Russia is prepared to go in seeking comprehensive security in Europe will depend how it reacts to proposals to renew the CFE and the respect to tactical nuclear weapons. If the START Treaty goes through ratification, then this issue will come up next. In addition to having a NATO-wide significance, the Baltic states have a particular interest. As mentioned earlier, we do not know the size of the arsenal nor the location of the missiles. And while for some countries these may be tactical weapons, for the Baltic states they are strategic. James Schlesinger, appearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, recently pointedly raised this very point. Needless to say, the Baltic states support the continuation of NATO's nuclear deterrent. If you look at the NATO-Russia agenda, further complexity arises from Russia's proposals for a new European security architecture and its proposals for limitations on substantial combat forces in the new NATO member states. One could argue that Russia's insistence on equal security with NATO may well mean that some are less secure than others. But in going forward, NATO needs to have a clear idea of how all of these proposals are linked, so that whatever NATO and its nations do, the alliance will not be weakened. I have not covered all aspects of NATO's renewal as the premier defense organization in the world, which, despite its internal family disagreements over the years, always sought to meet the challenges it faced. It will not be easy going forward. We will still have disagreements, but we will work them out. Thank you very much. I think we still have some time if somebody wants to venture a question. Yes, please.
Strategy and Freelance Correspondent, Bethesda, Maryland. You said that the new NATO going to have an essential role in Afghanistan. What's the essential role imply? And also, so many countries work in the single state, and also you mentioned the word coordination, and what kind of coordination should be, and also what's each country role. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, I think it became clear as ISAF expanded its responsibility from not just Kabul but for the whole of Afghanistan, that the issues that it faced were not just of a military nature. And over the years, as you know, a number of different organizations have entered Afghanistan to help with reconstruction and development. The World Bank, International Red Cross, and I could go on. And what we found is that each of different organizations, and even NATO nations who are responsible for PRTs in the different provinces of Afghanistan, are applying different, I don't know, standards or programs, initiatives that don't mesh with what somebody's doing next door. And then of course, the United Nations, UNAMA, has the overall responsibility for Afghanistan. And we found that there was a need for further and further coordination. And the general consensus, I think, of all the organizations, including NATO, is that UNAMA, the United Nations, is the principal coordinating actor in Afghanistan in terms of reconstruction and development. But you know, and there's a need now in Kabul for all those different organizations to meet together to talk about strategy, tactics, etc. And that is in fact taking place. We also, NATO has a special representative who, on the civilian side, tries to coordinate with the various actors, including, of course, ISAF. The situation becomes even more problematic when you go beyond. Well, let's put it this way: Afghanistan now is not just an Afghanistan problem; it's a regional problem, because you have Pakistan next door, and then when you have Pakistan, you have India. There's then the Central Asian states and Russia. Then you have China. Iran is involved. So the question is how to manage all those different partners. Not to speak of contact countries such as New Zealand, South Africa, Australia, Japan, and would you believe Mongolia now has become a part of the ISAF group. So this is a daunting task of how to coordinate all these different actors in a way that produces the results that I think everybody wants, that the international community wants. And let me tell you, I heard from Secretary Gates that it's difficult coordinating American departments. Can you imagine coordinating all those different international actors? So, what can I say?
NATO is, of course, made up of diverse countries, both economically and in terms of what their security priorities are. how would you evaluate the group of experts, band of experts report from the Baltic perspective or the Eastern European perspective? What would you have liked to have seen emphasized in it that wasn't? Or how would you have improved upon it from Eastern European perspective?
Well, I think the fact that, sorry to give a plug to Latvia, but one of the experts was Aivis Runs, who was an expert, now just recently became Latvia's foreign minister, was a member of that group. So I think there was a fair representation of all the different nations within NATO, including the Baltic states and Eastern Europe. As far as Eastern Europe, Professor Rothfeld from Poland also was on part of the band of experts. So I think in terms of representation, Central and Eastern European countries were well represented. And I think as a result, I think the Baltic states can be quite well satisfied with the results. The emphasis on Article 5, strategic reassurance, the whole notion of, well, if we feel safe at home, we can do more abroad. So generally, I think we're generally satisfied.
Asta Benonis. I have a question about NATO's internal capabilities for collective defense. So many of the NATO members have volunteer armies as opposed to using universal conscription. So is there a discussion in the new strategy document about the capabilities for collective defense in light of countries only having professional armies and not having active reserves, or even the ability to mobilize populations in an efficient and responsible manner?
Oh boy. I'm not sure how to come into that. Well, I'm going to refer to Kurt Walker earlier about the NRF. I think there's general consensus within NATO that the NRF has to be a sustainable unit, contingent, or force within NATO. And the reason is, in a sense, a double-headed reason. NRF is a deployable force that can go anywhere in the world. If it can go anywhere in the world, it can go anywhere within Europe. And for crisis management within Europe, under whatever conditions they may be, the NRF would do just as well for that purpose as it would for, I don't know, a contingency operation somewhere, Africa, Asia, or wherever else. So in terms of planning, I would say that probably not giving anything away by saying that the focus is on the use of the NRF as the principal force for Article 5 and broader operations globally.
Sir, I want to take you back to Afghanistan once more. You mentioned that it's a regional problem too. Now, since I personally believe, my assessment is that the United States decided to go into Afghanistan on its own and then dragged NATO into it, unless you want to deny that or say that I'm wrong. So now that you said it's a regional problem too, do you think that the United States is interested in pulling out, as Mr. Obama has said, at a certain schedule? Is it serious about that? And is NATO serious about it to hold Mr. Obama to that promise? And then the next is the regional groups being brought into this preparation for pullout, if that is going to be the case?
Well, I'm not sure that within the last 24 hours I've spoken to President Obama, so I'm not sure I can give you his views on this issue. But the position of NATO, of all 28 allies, is that, and I mentioned this in my remarks, the idea is to prepare Afghanistans themselves to take over responsibility for counterinsurgency and much more, which means that the priority at the moment is, and you will find this in various statements made by NATO officials and others, is that we have to train the Afghan army, the Afghan police force. And we're looking for omelets and pomlets, which are mentoring teams for the Afghan army and mentoring teams for the police. The police part is done in... Well, but the intensity of this is only last year or so. That the intensity for this has been speeded up, and the European Union does the police part, and ISAF does the army part. So that we have put down some markers of the numbers that we would like to see over the next couple of years be trained, so that more and more the Afghans themselves take the lead. And in fact, roughly 40% of operations are in fact Afghan-led now. So we're well on our way to creating that capability within Afghanistan. But of course, and that's why I mentioned Helmand and Kandahar, and General McChrystal sort of focus on those two provinces as the key ones for making sure that the populations are safe. And once that is done, and hopefully we can do that, or he can do that then, of course, as you know, he's indicated that he would like to begin withdrawing some American troops next year. Well, whether, you know, circumstances allow for that kind of a timetable to be kept, time will only tell. But certainly there's commitment on the part of all allies and also partner countries to go forward with that kind of a strategy that General McChrystal has outlined. And as far as the regional question is concerned, I'm sorry I may have missed the question itself about the regional aspect. No?
Yeah, I said, are you bringing the regional parties into some kind of a conglomerate or some kind of a group while you're making the preparation to get out if you are
Well, NATO has now established very good contacts with Pakistan. In fact, Turkey is the contact country, NATO contact country in Pakistan, and sort of does the diplomatic aspects of that. There is also a trilateral commission between COMISAF, Pakistan Army, and the Afghan Army. So there are mechanisms and efforts being made to coordinate things more carefully with Pakistan, especially on border issues. And there are various border sites along the Afghan-Pakistan border, centers, I should call them, where they exchange information about the movement of Taliban across the border and so on. So there is certainly a growing closer collaboration between NATO and Pakistan. We would like to see that expanded some more. But as you know, Pakistan has this caution about doing more, that principally that relates to moving their military closer to the Afghan border because of their concerns with India. So that is an issue that has to be explored further. We also have good relations with the Central Asian countries. In fact, we had a meeting last year in Kazakhstan where some of these issues related to Afghanistan came up. And we also have fairly regular dialogue with Russia on Afghanistan as well. So the question, well, what can I say about Iran?
They're also a neighbor, right?
I know. Yeah. Yep.
I'm Mike Halsall from Johns Hopkins SAIS, formerly of the Woodrow Wilson Center. I'd like to thank Ambassador Eichmann for a terrific, really insightful talk. And I really don't have a question for him. I just would like to respond to our last questioner. I wanted to say something when he made his intervention in the plenary session. To put it bluntly, I think you're living in a parallel universe, sir. The idea that 27 countries of NATO blindly follow the United States just simply flies in the face of all facts. I would draw your attention to the Iraq War, which almost tore the alliance apart. I would draw your attention to the Bucharest summit 2 years ago when two of our strongest, oldest allies in Europe, France and Germany, publicly stiffed the United States over the question of membership action plans for Ukraine and Georgia, and they still don't have them. Another questioner this morning brought up the question of Macedonia. One of our allies in NATO, Greece, completely defied the United States' wishes there. One could go on and on and on. The idea, you said twice now that the United States dragged its allies into Afghanistan. You have it exactly backwards. On September 12th, 2001, the European allies introduced, for the first and only time in the history of NATO, invoked Article 5 as a response to the September 11th attacks. It wasn't the United States dragging anybody in. It was the alliance supporting the United States. Also, I'd remind you that ISAF has a UN Security Council mandate. So this was not done blindly. There are 44 countries, I guess maybe if Mongolia is, there are now 45 countries in Afghanistan. I really think it's an insult to them to say that they were blindly dragged into anything. So I just want to put that on the record. I'm never sure if these things, if there is a record even in under Chatham House rules, but I just want to vigorously dispute all that you said. Thank you.
And I could only confirm what Michael said.
Mr. Ambassador, good afternoon.
Oh, sorry.
Joseph Frazier with Zillion Technologies. Sir, I served as a civilian in UNISOM back in the 90s, and I'm curious, moving forward to 2010, where does the document and perhaps you personally and professionally see the difference between forces under NATO serving communities that are deteriorating versus UN peacekeeping forces? Thank you.
I'm not sure I can answer that in any clear way. I have to say that I guess it's a year ago at least, if not longer, we signed an agreement with a memorandum with the United Nations to share more information, to coordinate our efforts in those kinds of situations. Obviously, I mean, if there's going to be that kind of a situation, that kind of a crisis, one would expect that this would go to the United Nations Security Council. And as in the case of Afghanistan, you know, the go-ahead, if you like.
May I clarify?
Oh, sorry.
I was perhaps if there were such a terrible situation to arise again, I'm curious if you're seeing the responsibilities of NATO troops different than that of peacekeeping troops for the UN, or will they be combined, or will they be reassigned? I'm just trying to get an idea of which organization might be handling which responsibilities in future conflicts that they would be involved in. Thank you.
Well, our experience in Afghanistan, I think I'm right in saying, was fluid. That is, it started out as a peacekeeping operation initially. And there are some countries who still operate under that assumption that it's still a peacekeeping operation, which creates some problems for the rest of us, but okay. And then it then became clear that it was not going to be a peacekeeping operation. It was going to be a peace-building operation, if you like, which actually means they have to go fight. So I think you would have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. Certainly, if Afghanistan is any sort of indicator that you cannot predict how developments will go once we arrive, under a peacekeeping mandate, and then things get out of control. I don't know how. It's a sort of a case-by-case approach. I think we'd have to use. Is that it? Yep. Excellent.
Okay. Thank you very much.